course, I'm Scott Hodge, president of the Tax Foundation. I'm really delighted to have a good friend of mine and the Tax Foundation, Barbra Angus, who's global tax policy leader at EY. Barbara has had some remarkable experiences in tax, whether it's at Treasury, 2 stints on Capitol Hill, I think it's been, one at the Joint Committee on Taxation, and the other is Chief Tax Counsel on Ways and Means during the exciting period of leading up to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And Barbara was instrumental in so many aspects of developing that policy. And I guess the first question to you before we get to your kind of path to Capitol Hill is, the question I get so much from people is, what made you interested in tax in the first place?
Well, that's a good question. And I think back on it, I took my first tax class in law school, my second year of law school, and I really liked that class. And about 3/4 of the way through the class, I realized that most people hated it. It seemed to me that I found my niche.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting juxtaposition. And the rest is history then.
Rest is history.
Yeah. Well, what was the path to Capitol Hill? Because you spent some time in the private sector, and then how did you end up at the Joint Committee?
So my path to Capitol Hill is a little bit different than most. I was a young partner at a big law firm in Chicago. Loved work, loved being a tax lawyer. But at that firm, there were several of my colleagues and several of the senior partners had spent time in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
Was at least one who had been at Treasury and a couple that had clerked for the tax court, and they all talked about their experiences in Washington with great fondness, and it really seemed to influence them. And so I got intrigued about the idea of spending some time in Washington, and just about as that was happening, just through a series of coincidences, I learned that the Joint Committee on Taxation was looking for somebody to do some international tax work, and they were looking to bring in somebody that had some significant private sector experience. And so I flew out to Washington and met with the staff and with Ken Keyes, who was then the new chief of staff. And it was a day when there was tax legislation on the floor in the Senate. It was the expatriation and foreign trust legislation. But it seemed like a really exciting time to be there, and so I never looked back.
Yeah, so when you arrived there, was there kind of a moment where you had to pinch yourself and say, "I'm working for Congress. I'm working in Congress," and how unique that is, and what the folks back home might have thought?
I feel like I had those moments the whole time I was there in both stints. It is such an incredible privilege and honor to be a part of the system in that way, as a staffer. And so I would say almost every week, sometimes every day, there'd be a moment when you'd be in a meeting and just wonder how it is that I got to be here at this place, witnessing this and being a part of this. I think that is really one of the greatest pleasures of an really intoxicating part of being a staffer.
Along the way, were there any other staffers that were role models that kind of took you under your wing and kind of guided you along that path?
I think really throughout my career, I feel like I was so privileged to have people who were mentors, either formally or informally, people who I could look up to and watch and learn from, and that also continued throughout my career. I feel like I learned as a staffer. You learn not just from your bosses and from more senior people, but I feel like all along the way I learned from all of my colleagues. People look at things differently. They bring different experiences, and getting to work so closely with people in such a team environment. Thinking back on my time at Ways and Means, I feel like I learned from all of my colleagues, from the tax team at Ways and Means, and from the rest of the team at Ways and Means. I learned so much from the communications team. Tax can be a complicated subject to talk about, and really hard to communicate to real people. And watching how they did what they did, I feel like I learned things that will benefit me throughout my career. And I guess if to single out one person, you couldn't have a better mentor or someone to learn from than Chairman Brady. He is a wonderful man. No one works harder. No one is more dedicated to the cause of tax reform. And I learn from him every day.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool experience. He's something else. Um, you obviously had some incredible experiences in different places. Do you have any obstacles along the way? I dare say glass ceilings, but just speed bumps along the way that you had to overcome to get where you are?
You know, I feel like I was really lucky in my career. I didn't really have any obstacles or glass ceiling, and I absolutely benefited from all the people who came before me. When I started out as a tax lawyer, I do remember when I was interviewing for jobs out of law school in Chicago, and approached the law firms that I wanted to talk about the tax department. Almost every firm included on my interview roster interviewing with people from the employee benefits department. And it seemed to be that they were of the view that if you're a woman who wants to do tax, you must want to do employee benefits. Oh. So I kept meeting with people who would talk about ERISA, and I had no idea who she was. But after that, I feel like I really can't identify any obstacles, and I'm really grateful for the people that paved the way. And I had the opportunity toward the end of my tenure at Ways and Means to be chief tax counsel for Ways and Means when all four chief tax counsels were women. There was a year there where all four of us were women. And maybe the coolest thing about that was almost nobody noticed.
Yeah, that does say a lot, doesn't it? Quite remarkable. Well, was there ever a time where you were kind of handed a task or an opportunity, and you were just kind of had to marvel that how much responsibility you've been given, and almost feel like, gee, that's a heavy lift for someone like myself?
I thought that all the time. I remember the first time when I was relatively new on the staff of the Joint Committee, the first time we were working with the Ways and Means team and going to a markup of legislation, and that night thinking that what we had crafted was about to be unveiled, and how was it that I was working on something that would affect so much. And I realized that it is such a team effort. There were so many people involved, both in getting to that point that the legislation was being unveiled, and frankly, it was going to continue to be a team effort as you went from the first markup all the way through enactment. So I didn't need to panic that I had been given this responsibility, because it was such a shared responsibility. But really, throughout my time on the Hill, I would look at things I was working on and wonder how someone like me got to do something like this.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Now this maybe I have to ask everybody this, but this is going to be a softball. What is your favorite piece of legislation that you worked on your time on the Hill?
Well, I think I will have to say the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I finished law school as the '86 Act was starting to go through Congress. So my last tax class at law school was when the bill was moving through Congress in the spring of '86. And I remember that my law school professor trained the class on an appropriate signal from him to chant in unison, "General Utilities Repeal." And then as I started at the law firm, I remember that the fall where we went into a couple nights a week, we would have long tax department meetings where people would present on all of the provisions in the 86 Act. And I still remember the feeling I had as a brand new associate about how smart I was to have planned my career so perfectly that there was brand new law as I was starting, so that these older guys in the firm weren't going to have a competitive advantage over me. It took me about a month to realize that I was completely wrong and nothing was ever new. And they did, in fact, their experience would continue to be valuable. But it was really cool to be able to be a part, from the beginning of the first big tax reform since 86. Chairman Brady would always talk about it as a generational event, and for me, it really did feel generational.
Well, obviously, for every great piece of legislation or satisfying one, there's a stinker in the bunch. There any, and you're among friends here, so you can tell us any particular legislation that you're embarrassed to have been part of, or anything that you thought was completely silly that you couldn't believe that someone had proposed it?
I can't say that there's anything that I was embarrassed to be a part of. And I'm not sure I would describe anything as a stinker. I will say that the two pieces of legislation for which I have red lines framed in my office are the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the first piece of legislation that passed while I was at Ways and Means, which is a one-page bill to provide an exclusion for the amounts that Olympic athletes receive in connection with winning a gold, silver, or bronze medal. So the juxtaposition of a bill that the whole bill was one page versus the signature page of the TCJA is, I enjoy that.
That is good. Well, I mean, given your experiences, is there a moment when you just kind of think, I just witnessed history, and this has got to go in my autobiography?
I feel like there were an awful lot of those moments, although they were certainly inside baseball or inside tax moments. So I'm not sure that it's an autobiography that anybody would want to read, but a lot of moments that I will remember forever.
Well, aside from the times that I testified before Ways and Means, what's the strangest or funniest thing that you ever saw during a hearing, or on the floor of the House, and you just kind of have to laugh and say, I cannot believe I just saw that?
Well, I would say that some of those moments probably are best left remembered by the few people who saw them. But one, you mentioned testifying before Ways and Means. One moment that I remember vividly is, and it was leading up to a hearing. We had a witness coming for a hearing on sort of post TCJA hearing on what effects it had had on business. We had a small businessman coming from Chicago, and he had a lot of flight challenges because of bad weather in Chicago. And he finally texted me at about midnight saying he was on a plane that was taking off, but his bag wasn't on the plane, and he was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. So I had to rally my colleagues to bring in some extra clothes from the people who seemed to be about his size. And so he testified wearing a borrowed jacket and tie, and his jeans and sneakers. So in some ways, he testified looking a little bit like all of us look today on Zoom.
Well, I guess that speaks to the extra things that you have to do as a staffer that are a little bit beyond the call of duty. Well, being I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of members, and some do or do not have much background in tax. Most of them don't. So without naming names, what's the dumbest question a member of Congress ever asked you?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that. I was I was always so impressed with the kinds of questions that members would have. And they went not necessarily to the technical details the way that we technicians think about tax, but the questions they would ask about how this provision would affect people or affect businesses. And often they were very difficult questions to answer, but it made me realize they were the most important questions.
Mm. So what do you think your takeaway was from working on the Hill? What did you learn most from working on the Hill, and what advice would you give to a young staffer today based on that experience?
You know, as someone who spent my career in tax, I really cherish the time that I spent on the Hill, and believe that everything I learned on the Hill has been incredibly valuable in everything else that I've done. It really translates. Learning how to communicate, the teamwork, all of the aspects of the Hill, including ones that you wouldn't necessarily think you'd ever use again, you will. I think my advice for a young staffer on the Hill would be to remember every day what a privilege it is to be in your role, and to enjoy every minute of it, because you will look back on it very fondly.
Yeah, that's very nice. Well, we have some parting, what we call poll questions. They're fun, silly. We'll be asking everyone, and then we'll be including these poll questions to all the attendees. This is like one of those game shows where the survey says. So the first one, being a congressional staffer is most like the following and why. It's most like being a comfort dog in training, B, an extra in the TV show Veep, C, it's most like being a rodeo clown, or D, the entertainment director at Chuck E. Cheese. Either A, a comfort dog in training, B, an extra in the TV show Veep, C, a rodeo clown, and D, the entertainment director at Chuck E. Cheese.
I think I might have to go with a rodeo clown, because they're every day is different, and you never know what the next meeting or the next event is going to bring.
Very interesting. Well, then, in your opinion, what is the most accurate political TV show? A, House of Cards, B, West Wing, C, Veep, or D, 24?
Oh my, I hope it's not 24.
There's a lot of torture in that show.
I will go with West Wing, although I do remember I had an opportunity once to visit the set of West Wing, and saw in one of the sets there was on a shelf a binder that said budget, and I felt compelled to pull it out, and it was empty.
Very interesting. It's all a set. What's thinking, just as a last question, contrast your time on the Hill with working in Treasury. Very, very different experiences, I'm sure, but each must have been very, very unique.
Treasury was a different experience. I think for me, in my role at Treasury, what was most different about it and was the fact that I had the opportunity to interact with tax officials in a lot of other countries, both through participation in the OECD and tax treaty negotiations. So there was something that meant a lot to me, the opportunity to be kind of the face of the United States in these negotiations. So I think for me, that was the privilege and honor of getting to be a part of Treasury, to be able to say I was a representative of the United States.
And of course, I remember your story about Mark and coming home and saying that you've been demarched, and him not knowing what that meant.
Yeah, getting a formal rebuke from the government of France was certainly a memorable experience. although I thought it should have been delivered in person with trumpets and white gloves, and instead I received it by email.
Well, this has been fun. I just can't thank you enough for sharing these experiences with us and being a part of this. And you've had certainly a remarkable career, and it continues obviously, and it remains exciting times in tax, especially with this what you're obviously following the OECD and all of that. So this is quite a moment in tax policy, both domestically and globally.
It is exciting times, and I appreciate the chance to have this conversation. It's been fun to think about these memories, and I hope that next year we'll be together for tax prom. I will confess that I'm wearing slippers right now, so my feet are more comfortable than they usually are at tax prom. But I'd like to be wearing those uncomfortable shoes and seeing everyone again.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's great
Thank you,
talking to you.
Scott.
Thanks. Enjoy. Have a great day.
Have a good day.
Thanks.